This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, welcome guys to episode eight of the Cabal cast. So we are back. Woad is off. It's his last week. His kid was born yesterday, 2 days ago?
Yeah, somewhere in the last 2 days.
Somewhere in the last 2 days. So he'll be back with us next week. This was a pretty big week. There was a huge announcement from Magic about the future / demise of the Pro Tour RIP, as well as a Modern GP and the Star City Invitational, which kind of got slammed by a bunch of weather, so there's not nearly as many results from there as we'd like. But when 100 flights get canceled, that's what happens. So, start us off.
So, the Star City Invitational was this past weekend, and what we have from that is a series of, or set of results rather, from a mixed format event, as the events on Sunday were canceled, or any events that ran from Saturday into Sunday were canceled. And we are looking at kind of a homogenized field for this event. The standard decks that people brought to the top 8 and even the top 16 are all pretty much the same, and Golgari mid-range being number 1 in terms of popularity. Is it Drake's and Jeskai decks kind of followed thereafter. There were 2 Selesnya tokens decks that did make it into the top 8. One was played by Zachary, I believe you pronounce his last name, Keeney, who was on the winning team of SCG Vegas. He played Selesnya tokens there. I do not know the difference between the lists. I didn't get a chance to look. And then there was Gerard Fabiano, who did play Jeskai Control, but per his usual, he played his own version of it.
It's a really sweet list.
It is. He pulled out Niv Mizzets and Expansion Explosions for some other knickknacks that allowed him to survive a little bit longer and get things done. But I don't know if I can really get behind...
Nexus.
Yeah, oh, that's right, the Nexus of Fate, to just kind of go back to that, and Karn. So he was playing those 8 cards over basically Expansion Explosion and Niv Mizzet. And then on the modern side of things for these top 8 players, we had 2 KCI decks, a Dredge deck, we had 1 Is It Phoenix deck, 1 Bant Spirits deck, and 1 Mono Red Phoenix deck. The Phoenix deck, both Phoenix decks, I believe, were pretty much carbon copies from the week prior. The KCI decks were also very similar. The differences were mainly in the sideboard, where Austin Collins, who exited in yet another top 4 appearance, played things like Tormod's Crypt so he could continue to recur it, while Andrew Jessup went a little harder with Spine of Isha and go infinite with removal.
Yeah.
And then the only outstanding decks after that are Bant Spirits, which is, again, another carbon copy deck from weeks previous, and Gerard Fabiano on his Junt deck. And we got to watch him play against KCI and steal at least 1 game in the top 4 best of 5 on the back of main deck Kolagon's Commands.
Card's real good.
Yeah, and I believe he had main deck Nihil Spellbombs as well. So basically
3.
So basically both his Jeskai deck and his Jund deck were metagamed for this particular event.
Yep.
And this is why these results, while important, aren't necessarily something you can kind of walk away with and say, this is the way Modern looks.
Yeah, don't just net deck it, because, and it's funny because I am a Jund player. There's actually a ton of Jund players that are arguing over whether Fabiano's deck is legitimate or not. And people are saying, oh, it's garbage. Why are you maining Spellbomb? And people are like, no, this is a good list. It's Fabiano.
Yep.
Like, no, it's somewhere in between. He metagamed. Just like Shota, he metagamed for that. It's a general idea of how to play it, but don't take this as, oh, Nihil Spellbomb's going to go up now because Gerard Fabiano has 3 in his main board.
Yeah. And all the decks that we saw bubble to the top 8 on both the standard and the modern side were extremely consistent decks. Everything is just good at its job. The last couple of rounds were just basically Dredge versus KCI for the most part, and you just got to see how consistent these decks were, and that's basically looked like the secret to winning this event. Golgari came in at, I believe, over 10% of the field, something ridiculous, something close to 30. And you can see that by the top 8 results. It was just very consistent on the weekend, and most of the builds were pretty much the same. People are moving to Midnight Reaper in the main so that they can deal with sweepers and various pieces of removal and just keep the cards flowing. And if you watch any part of the event that weekend, you can just see why it's as good as it is.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, when we look at the GP, the GP Portland was modern. The top 8 is a little more spread out, but things do kind of fall in line. We have 2 Izzet Phoenix decks in the top 8 instead of 1 Izzet and 1 Mono Red.
Mono Red.
And they're extremely similar lists, again, differing mainly in the sideboard. But one of the interesting things is that both of these decks are playing at least one copy of Alpine Moon, a card that on the same weekend was bemoaned by people in the Star City event. There were a number of interviews asking about, well, why Blood Moon, or no Blood Moon, why no Alpine Moon, and everybody there bemoaned the card, speaking specifically to that event, while at the GP, this card showed up as 3 total in the top 8.
Yeah.
We had a Storm deck, a Golgari mid-range deck, which is basically just Jund with Kalidas and Assassin's Trophy, no Abrupt Decays.
Red.
Yep, no red and no Abrupt Decays.
Yeah.
We had an Elves deck, which is really interesting to see, playing Beast Whisperer and Elvish Clan Caller. And you can actually find a copy of this deck, I believe the exact 75, in one of the modern events from Saturday on Star City site.
Yep.
And then the eventual winner, Tyler Putnam, played Grixis Death Shadow with 2 Faithless Looting in the main, which was pretty interesting to see. And the standout deck of this top 8 was Yuta Takahashi finally making it with a blue-black control deck. You can call it Fairies if you want. There were 4 spell Stutter Sprite and 4 Bitter Blossoms in the main to go along with 1 Vendilion Click in the sideboard. Otherwise, It was 3 Liliana of the Veil and 3 Jace the Mind Sculptor. It's just a pure tempo deck.
It's blue-black control tempo, whatever you want to call it. I guess it has fairies, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, Unity.
Yeah. Actually, I skipped over this one. I don't know how. The Abzan Evolution deck that made the top 8. The only other combo deck besides Storm in the top 8 in a field of what looked like basically mid-range decks.
Yeah.
You can consider Elves to be combo if you want, but this was a Shaman of the Pack build, so it's going to take a little while to get there, and then it'll just blow you out with the Shaman. But this Abzan Evolution deck is basically the Counters Company deck from almost a year ago, but there's no Collected Company. It still has the Devoted Druid and Vizier of the Remedies combo in it, sporting 4 Court of Calling, but instead it plays 4 Evolution and 4 Postmortem Lunge, which is kind of interesting. And Postmortem Lunge is a hell of a card because it allows you to reanimate at sorcery speed, and if you Eldritch Evolution away that creature, it just goes back to your graveyard. There were no instances of Undying that I saw in the deck or Persist, so there's no real value to any of those creatures besides the evolution. But it definitely looked like it gave the deck some staying power.
Yeah.
And if you look at the mana base, it's very much like the Birthing Pod decks of old, except they moved the Gavany Townships into the creature slot with 2 Shalai.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this deck is very reminiscent of Pod and pretty much exactly the Counters Company deck, but without Company.
Yeah. And I think Shalai is really what pushed it over the edge.
I think so,
being
too.
Being able to actually have it as a threat rather than just a land that sits there.
Yeah, and with as much ramp as this deck had, getting it out on turn 3, being able to play that creature is fairly powerful against a field that basically otherwise is mid-range. You look at the top 8, and I think this is more a little in line with what the modern metagame looks like as a whole than the Star City event. You know, is it Phoenix decks in modern can kind of go off on turn 3 with monomorphos, but even at that point, the Abzan Evolution deck can just have you dead.
Yeah.
You know. And this is a pretty interesting event looking at the results going into 2019 with, I believe, no modern GP slated for the first few months. We just have a PT and then a bunch of standard because we go straight into Rav round 2.
Yeah, that's correct.
So we're definitely going to see an uptick on some of the interesting knickknacks from the GP, most likely in the Elves category, and then again in Lily Last Hope, who showed up for a second time in a GP.
Yeah, I think you may incidentally, because it seems like the Coco lists and Abzan Evolution, they're getting more popular.
Yeah.
Same with Is It Phoenix? So I think you may see stuff like Grafdigger's Cage start to tick up, not by too much because it's been printed a million times, but that'd be something I'd expect to see head up a little bit more now that, the other sideboard cards that aren't Leyline of the Void have been reprinted, looking at you, Engineered Explosives.
Yeah.
And have just started crashing in price. So
yeah, but it was a kind of a quiet weekend overall in regards to results and most likely their impact on finance. Like I said, it's just going to be some of those corner case things, cards people dusted off like Kalidas and Lily of the Last Hope. It basically keeps going up in popularity.
Yeah,
and that brings us back around to our main topic, which is the announcement that we had.
Oh boy. So obviously everyone's examined it, dissected it since it was made. Big thing here, which we actually touched on in one of our first episodes, was the commitment to eSports. And I said then I didn't see it happening. I was wrong. Well, I was wrong that they're going to push it anyways. We'll see how successful it is. Although with $10 million in prize support, they're probably going to be pretty successful, I would imagine.
Yeah.
The big things here, Pro Tours are gone. So there's no Pro Tours anymore. There's now Mythic Championships, which you can automatically qualify for by being one of the 32 paid players. And maybe the new PPTQ system that they were making for the Pro Tour that's now gone after they changed the way the Pro Club works. It's kind of a nightmare to deal with. But one of the big impacts here is if, in fact, the field is going to be smaller than it was for these Mythic Championships. If we're not going to have 500-600 people up there, if we're only going to have 200, the sample size for what's relevant in any given format changes drastically.
Yep.
So you're not going to have a 500-man field with 30% Jeskai. You'll have a 200-person field with 30% Jeskai that's going to be way more skewed because, you've got 60 people rather than 150. And percentage-wise, it works out, but the skill level is going to be so much higher that you're not going to be able to luck sack through limited. The last Pro Tour was decided on limited.
Yeah, basically.
Like that top 8 was who won limited, and that's not necessarily going to be the case anymore, depending how they do it. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, because it could be archetypes that were birthed in Pro Tours past just don't exist anymore. Because rather than having Sam Black and 5 other people play this deck because they qualified on their Hall of Fame status, well, they didn't win any of the qualifiers, so that deck never sees the light of day.
Yeah. And with 32 people or 200 people, whatever they're going to do for these events, it's a smaller field. There's no more team series, so the amount of people playtesting together could most likely shrink, and you're going to lose a lot of that hidden tech that might spike the Pro Tour and then spike in value coming out of it.
Yeah, so I think this makes the 5-0 lists a lot more important.
Yeah, that's understandable. And the other interesting thing is that they still haven't decided whether these are going to be paper or arena yet. And if they are arena, does that mean people have to play with what they have, or will WotC feed them cards like they do the coverage accounts when you watch Moto streamers and arena streamers? And if they are fed the cards, that means everybody has access to everything. So people who made it there based on skill, they spiked something and made it there, they might not be sponsored, have access to everything. So that can also homogenize the field, because when everybody is super, nobody is.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I think the biggest thing here, I think Wizards needs to figure out what it's doing. Because it seems like there's 2 separate departments in Wizards in charge of competitive play.
Yep.
And this one says, we're going to listen to the pros and change the Pro Tour. We change the Pro Club. We change how long you keep your rank. And then this department says, we're getting rid of the Pro Tour. We have Mythic Championships. The Pro Club is gone. At the end of this season, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
Sorry you wasted all that time qualifying. It's gone now. Oh, also, sorry if you're not one of the 32 best players in the world. We're not paying you to show up to our events anymore.
Yeah, that's harsh. the last couple of years definitely felt like a company that was still in startup mode, where they're just making decisions and firing on them without a whole lot of internal information gathering or even external information gathering. And it's got to be infinitely frustrating as a pro player. You know, somebody who makes their livelihood off of this game, who makes some, well, you know, somebody you can expect to be on every pro tour.
Yeah.
You know, is going to make some portion of their yearly
Reed.
income based on that. Exactly. You know.
Jerry.
Yep.
Well, what do you think of your letter now, Jerry?
He's doing Star City coverage now, so
I know. It's really interesting that was timed, like, right when this announcement was made.
yeah, a year and change after he left R&D, doesn't do a whole lot on the Invitational circuit, and then wins a Pro Tour.
Yeah, and then writes this letter about why Wizards needs to publicize their events better, and then joins Star City,
Yeah.
who, admittedly, does a damn good job of publicizing their events.
Yeah, and there's also ways to qualify now through additional tournaments, basically using a fair amount of Star City terminology to identify those events. So we could go back to seeing people being able to qualify for Mythic Championships through the Star City Invitational, like there was for a very small period of time. It must have been maybe 6 months, so 2 Pro Tours worth.
Yeah.
People were able to qualify from the TCG Player 10K or 50K, whatever they hold out there.
And the Star City Invitational.
On the Envy, yeah. So we might go back to seeing a wider net cast to bring in players like this.
I think, to take an analogy from sports, because, I'm a football guy, doing something like that definitely makes your scouting pipeline self-sufficient. It builds itself. You don't have to worry about building personalities then. The people just make themselves. I would like to see them go in that direction, because then there's more coverage for smaller events, which exposes more cards, which means more money on more cards.
Yeah. Wizards doesn't have to expose the cards in their game, because that's handled by the secondary market. They need to expose their tournament series, and that's what their marketing department can effectively turn to now. We existed in the Planeswalker era for a bit, where that's what the game became. From Lore 1 onward, it was about being a Planeswalker while you play the game. Now it's about being a player, be it a tournament player or a casual and invisible, so to speak. The game is more about the player, the tournament, and bringing in those people to the game and making them feel welcomed and involved with a better spectator sport, basically. Yeah,
and I think Arena, I'll eat my hat on this one. Arena actually worked out. Granted, Coca is a thing. Correlation is not equal causation, but there is a correlation between Arena's success and viewership of Pro Tours, GPs, attendance at pre-releases that we've seen.
Yeah.
So it's definitely helped the game.
That's huge.
Still don't like it, but it was good. My main thing is, again, and like you said, if you qualify and you just have open access, you're one of the sponsored players, great. But you're going to be at an advantage holding your position to someone who doesn't have that sponsorship, because they have to grind out those cards.
Yeah.
But
speaking of Arena, while that product is soaring, the other virtual product was tanking.
Real bad.
Yeah. So in the middle of last week, I believe the day before the announcement, we had an article go up on Channel Fireball about the death of Moto. The rise of Arena is the death knell for Moto, which crashed the Moto economy. Basically, the entire... it started with fetch lands, and it just kind of rippled from there. And then Card Hoarder said they were going to stop buying Moto collections for the time being due to volatility in the market.
Yep. And then the announcement hit. It's almost like Channel Fireball knew an announcement was coming and published an article. Who knew?
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah.
It's like it all works out for them in the end.
Yeah. It's... And the thing that is really unfortunate is that if Moto goes away, I think we can basically acknowledge that Legacy is dead. That was Moto was where the innovation happened. That's where
Yep.
those cards maintain their value because that's where the exposure was.
Mm-hmm.
These are the decks you should be building. These are the decks that are good on Moto.
Yep.
UC is worth money because Grixis Delver is doing so well on Moto.
Yep.
Well, without that exposure, all of a sudden, UC isn't ever hit $600.
No.
It's lucky to hit 400.
We go back to the heydays of Legacy and Vintage, where people in the U.S. are waiting on results from Bazaar of Moxen over in Europe and the MKM series, and because that's where Legacy is played when it's not played on Moto. Japan a little bit now, very much more so than the U.S. aside from the Star City circuit. And sure, some stores hold weekly Legacy events, in Northern California, in Ohio, in Washington State, but not nearly as often and with as many players as they have in Europe.
Yeah. And not that, this means those cards necessarily crash in value, but the demands, if this happens, which honestly I think it's going to, when it happens, those prices are going to start to drop. It's not going to be sudden. It's going to be gradual.
Yeah.
And it's going to be great for the collectors, but the players, if, Moto goes the way of the dodo, which granted, before they said we're abandoning Moto for Arena, they did say we're not abandoning Moto. We're still going to do the online championship series. Whatever, Wizards. So we have presumably a year left. But that may be it.
Yeah.
And after that year, if Moto goes away, Legacy, congrats Wizards, you got your wish, is finally dead, and you can ignore the reserve list forever.
Yep. And Pauper as well. They can actually start moving cards around a little more or less aggressively because they no longer have to worry about that format.
Yeah, that's true too.
They've definitely atoned for some sins recently. I think it was Peregrine Drake. They abandoned Pauper because they shifted it down.
As soon as that was spoiled at Common, I'm like, you guys should just ban this because you have a banned announcement before the set release. You just need to ban it beforehand.
Yeah.
Nope. We got 2 months with it.
Yeah. And before we continue on with the rest of the cast and move away from the topic of the announcement, tucked away within the announcement was another announcement about another format coming to Arena, which is basically going to be everything that Arena can handle in terms of standard, but with no dedicated start point yet. So we know Arena has at least Kaladesh. That's what I thought. It's either Shadows or Kaladesh. Somewhere in there is where the card files for the game itself actually begin.
Yeah.
And this is the postmodern format that we talked about last week or the week before, and we've heard some rumblings about. There's been no official announcement about it, whether it'll be really supported outside of Arena or even really inside Arena as less than is it a daily
format or something? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the rotating events in Arena.
Yeah.
But this does have some ramifications if this becomes a paper format.
Tireless Tracker.
If they start,
wealth.
Yeah, if they started Shadows.
Yeah.
If they start,
otherwise, Spire Bluff, those fast lands are suddenly, they could reach Blackleaf Cliffs prices.
Yeah, this is a very important announcement to look for. I don't know when it's supposed to be coming because they haven't announced that announcement yet. They just announced the announcement to the announcement.
Yeah. They haven't announced the announcement date of the announcement and the announcement.
Correct. So you gotta, you can look at cards as saying, all right, what's in Modern, what's being played, Tireless Tracker, Eldritch Evolution, Duskwatch Recruiter, Walking
Kalidas.
Ballista. Yeah.
Ballista.
And then
The Lamps.
Yep, and you can look at the other side of it, which was, okay, what was banned in the standard formats, and should I be picking those up? Because they are cheap.
Smuggler's Copter.
Emrakul.
Rampaging Ferocidon.
Yeah. Aetherworks Marvel, which wasn't banned, but should have been. Which is an EDH card, so that one kind of doubles up.
Yeah, true, yeah.
Saheeli. She wasn't banned, the cat was, but Saheeli does more than the cat.
Yeah.
Surprisingly.
Saheeli can exist without the cat. The cat doesn't do a whole lot without Saheeli.
Yeah.
It's not Resto.
No. And so this is definitely a time where you can begin to look at a risk-reward Do you want to move in on a lot of these cards that are unnecessarily cheap because they were banned out of Standard and they have no real appeal? Is that worth the risk for whatever the reward is? Or would you rather play it safe and pick up on cards that are kind of cheap but do see Modern play and will continue to exist as long as the Modern format does? In cards like Kalidas, which shows up every now and again, Tireless Tracker, which is pretty much a dedicated sideboard slot for green decks that aren't Jund, and a main deck slot for most decks that are Jund. I believe Abzan, mid-range when that deck shows up.
That has Tracker. Rock has Tracker in the main,
Yeah. And Tracker goes all the way on to Legacy.
Yeah.
So.
RIP.
Yeah. So this announcement, the primary announcement, definitely ripples and will for a fairly long time, probably up until the first Pro Tour of 2019.
Yeah.
We're going to keep seeing these little shockwaves because we're still waiting on what the PTQ system is going to look like. We haven't gotten that information.
Yeah, they said the first two remain the same, but after that, TBD.
Yeah.
So
we have... Yeah, and there's a ton of conjecture floating around right now. Nobody's really certain about what's going to happen. So this is a point in time where you really need to start making decisions on your own, especially from a financial perspective, and think about, what do you want to do? If you're a Moto player, do you want to stay on Moto? Do you want to try and cash out in some way, shape, or form, even under depressed ticket prices right now, and maybe move into Arena? If you're a paper Legacy grinder or a paper Modern grinder, do you think those formats are going to continue to exist in paper, or maybe eventually they will support Modern on Arena? And really just kind of get down to brass tacks and see, what do you want to do? And we'll be here to guide you as we find out more about what's happening, but right now we just have a lot of shakeup.
Yeah, for sure.
So
picks.
Yeah, this is, we've come to the end of the cast, basically, with picks on the way out the door. So, coming to this morning, I was thinking about Berserk, CN2, because Infect was on the uptick, but it hasn't put up results in about 2 weeks, and the exiled foil's like $12, otherwise it's 9 to 10. But after digging in this morning, I'm going to go with Experimental Frenzy, and not because it's tanked in price because of Standard.
The Affinity list? Did you see the Affinity list?
The Affinity list.
So good.
Yeah. So there was a team that went, is it 9-3 or 10-3?
Yeah.
And I think their Affinity player lost
to Hardened Scales.
Yeah.
That was his only loss.
And once to Blue-White Miracles, but they won that round.
Yeah. Right? His team won that round. He was losing game 2 of 2 when his team won. So
yeah, and Experimental Frenzy just kind of makes the deck function like it did in Old Standard. Right now, the camp on Affinity itself is divided whether or not it's a good deck in this format as it stands, old school Affinity, or if Hardened Scales is the way to go because it's more explosive and can win faster. But Experimental Frenzy just allows you to go insane off the top. You basically pull the Masters of Ethereum out. That's the 3 slots for 3 Experimental Frenzy. You just
straight swap.
Yeah, slam those in and you're good to go. Nothing else needs to change. And between that, the depressed price in Standard with both Rakdos and Gruul coming up and the ability to just play a lot of cheap creatures off the top, I think there's going to be reinvigorated interest in Standard. And casual play, this is going to be a long-term gain. Yeah. Getting in right now, the market price is about 2.25. The average is about 3. So once the first 20 or so are bought out at 2.25, it goes up 75 cents. I think this is a fine buy up until $5, and then it holds on, and you can get out in the short term.
Yeah. I read that event report and I was like, man, this looks absolutely insane. Yeah. A couple of buddies of mine that play Affinity, I was like, hey, did you see this list yet? Looks ridiculous. And his match report, it was really interesting because he said he would go up to 4 Experimental Frenzies and he would probably cut Etch Champion. Said that was the worst by far card in his deck. I think I agree with Frenzy. That's a really good pick. Mine is somewhat ties into what we talked about, actually, with the post-standard as well as just general supply. Pack foil Rashmi, Crafter of Eternities. So Right now, the pack foils are like $2 to $5 on the low end. I could easily see this in 6 months to a year being a $10 foil.
Okay.
So
Oh yeah.
there's
look
one
at
thing EDH players love: foils.
Mhm.
Everyone hates date stamps, so don't bother with pre-release, whatever. If there's one card in your deck you're going to foil, it's Rashmi. It's the type of card that in a post-standard environment, if it includes Kaladesh, is 1 or 2 cards away from being absolutely busted in half.
Yeah.
Free spells, free draws. Elves exist. We have Beast Whisperer, which lets you draw cards.
Oh, it is an elf. Yeah, look at that.
Yeah. So there's plenty of opportunity there for those things to sort of snowball into something bigger. I'm up to about 30 or so of them myself. I think it's a fine buy, much like Experimental Frenzy, up until about $5.
Yeah.
It's a bit more long-term than what Frenzy's looking like, obviously. But I think it's something that I am comfortable going in on it for nothing else in EDH demand.
Yeah.
But if post-standard becomes a format, or post-modern, whatever you want to call it, it could be busted clean in half pretty easily in that metagame.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of impressed at how little the non-foil costs.
Yeah, it's like 50 cents.
Yeah.
It's real cheap. The non-foils are also something to consider getting. The main reason I say not to is because it's from a masterpiece set, so the non-foil prices are insanely depressed on every single card.
Yeah.
Because people just open that set into the ground. At least with the pack foils and the pre-release foils, you've got a little bit more scarcity there. I just don't think it's going to happen, but if we get, a postmodern elf ball deck, Rashmi's an auto-include as a 4-of, even if she is a legend.
No, absolutely. It goes really well in a teamer deck with Experimental Frenzy. You just cast your first spell off the top, and you can see the next spell. You just chain spells. It's great.
Yeah. Pretty good, right? Okay, so
combo.
Coming in for the next couple weeks, we're actually going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of the graded conversation we started last week, as well as touching on just some general strategies, not just for graded cards, but what to do with your bulk, stuff like that. Just general investment tips while we're in the slow news cycle season. Of course, if some announcement happens about an announcement date for an announcement to announce an announcement,
we'll be there.
We'll be there.
Yeah.
But that's it. You can find me at Thirsty Sizzler on Twitter.
I am Halt. I am Reptar on Twitter and Reddit if you're in the MTG Finance subreddit. And then you can find us at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter. We will answer questions as we get them, and a Patreon announcement will be coming this week.
Yep. So. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
See ya.